Hey guys, what's up? I'm CJ and welcome back to my galaxy. Today we're talking about whether or not the Hunger Games series is going to get another novel included into the series, the franchise. You guys get what I mean. So we're talking about, is there going to be like another prequel? I've seen online a lot that people think there's going to be another edition because people think there's going to be another it's going to be a completed trilogy, all the prequels. So there's going to be like a prequel book rather than like a sequel or an addition to the original trilogy. But I have an opinion, and my opinion is that I don't think there's going to be another novel, but I wanted to talk about both sides to see like what the potential novel could be and why I don't think that there's going to be a novel. So we're going to start basically with what kinds of books could Suzanne Collins write, whether that be a prequel or a sequel. I think there's a lot of different options, especially what I've seen online, that people think that there's like there's so many different characters we have in this world. Suzanne Collins has done a lot of world building, but you know, what is actually plausible for the franchise in general. The first one I have down, obviously I'm looking down at my notebook like always, the first one being a Finnick novel. Everyone wants a Finnick novel. Now that we have a Haymitch novel, everyone wanted that. People think that obviously with that kind of fan service, we're gonna get a Finnick novel. But I don't think we can have a Finnick novel, at least not like an actual like what his games were, what his life is, because if we think about it, Finnick was sold to capital people. He was literally prostituted to the capital people, and Snow sold him, and I don't want to read that kind of novel. That is even more depressing than Haymitch. Quite frankly, the Haymitch novel was sadistic, and I don't need Suzanne Collins showing me what Finnick's life was. And not to mention it's a young adult novel. You know, there's nothing graphic other than violence in Suzanne Collins' novel. So I don't think those kinds of themes are going to go into how she writes young adult novels. So a Finnick novel from his perspective wouldn't work. But if we're going to get a novel to do with Finnick and kind of his story, maybe we could have an Annie novel instead. So like Annie Cresta, Finnick's wife at the end of Mockingjay, and the mother of his child. We could get kind of like a love story between the two of them, and it would be based in, I think she won the 71st Hunger Games, so it'd be a little bit before Katniss and Peeta's games. So we would see the progress from like Haymitch's games to Annie's games, and see like when the rebellion was kind of like kicking off right before Katniss and Peeta kind of lit that spark. And then we wouldn't get like Finnick's perspective. We would hear about him being sold, and that would add to like the themes that Suzanne Collins has mentioned about Finnick without it being too graphic. But then it would be like Annie and Finnick and their story, and maybe like, just like I said, like the progress. I think that one as a prequel would make sense if we're going across the timeline from the 10th Hunger Games to the 50th Hunger Games, and then all the way back to almost where Katniss and Peeta were. And then we would get a little bit more information on District 4 and what life was in other districts outside of 12. One novel idea I've heard a lot about on the internet is a Plutarch novel, because he is an incredibly grey character, and everyone's very intrigued as to how this character's mind works. And I think Plutarch would be a good addition to the themes that Suzanne Collins has. Like Plutarch would be kind of like a Snow novel, like Songbirds and Snakes, because he is a capital person, and Plutarch very obviously had a massive influence on the rebellion, but he kind of played both sides, capital and district, capital and rebellion. He had contacts with District 13. He would give us like a full scope of what the rebellion was and how that difference between like the attempt with Haymitch's games all the way up to Katniss being successful. So he would give us an insight. Except what people have been saying on the internet and social media, I've seen a lot of it obviously on TikTok, is that people want to see like post Haymitch's games. But this is a young adult novel. We're gonna see, if another novel comes out, it's gonna be like a 16 to 18 year old age range. It's gonna be the young adult novel. It's not going to be an adult. It's not going to be like 30, 40 something year old Plutarch as a novel, because it's just what the age range is. That's what the target audience is. So that's what Susan Collins' protagonist ages generally are. So if we're going to get a Plutarch novel, you'd be moving backwards in the timeline. You'd be looking at more like maybe around Beatty's games, which then if you're looking at Plutarch and his perspective, then we're looking at the perspective and Beatty's story and seeing how he won and how he kind of started having ideas for rebellion and when that part of the rebellion started. And obviously we know Beatty has like all of these ideas. He's like the ideas man behind the rebellion. He started the idea for Haymitch's games. He started the idea for the eventual successful rebellion. He's obviously had a bunch of ideas to rebel up until that point as well. Because Plutarch and Beatty are around about the same age. I think I figured out that Plutarch would be a little bit older. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but they're around about the same age. So you'd be looking at like a Plutarch and a Beatty story for that kind of perspective. Now, another idea I've seen is Cinna. So a Cinna perspective, which I think would probably be my most favorite idea. If that kind of book came out, I'd be so hyped, because Cinna has probably, he's the age, I don't really know how old he'd be, to be honest, but he's like a new stylist in the game, so he'd probably be on the younger side when Katniss shows up. So that would make him, like, his perspective, him being a teenager, probably early enough, late enough from Haymitch's games, but early enough from Katniss that we kind of have like an in-between area to see the progress, like I've been saying, like the progress from Haymitch's games, to see like how the rebellion began to develop from Haymitch's failed attempt to break the arena. Cinna would give the perspective of the capital that Plutarch would also give, but in like, my dog is like rustling through the trees over here. Nova, what are you doing? Like I was saying, Cinna would give the capital perspective, but it wouldn't be like a grey hero. It wouldn't be like a grey hero. It'd be more like Sejanus. We'd be getting a character that Sejanus was, but he ended up dying, but also Cinna ended up being killed by the capital as well. I think a Cinna novel has every potential. The only problem I would have is that Suzanne Collins has the perspective, or the characters she writes from are kind of like characters that survived the rebellion-ish. Obviously Snow did not survive the rebellion. He was killed at the end of Mockingjay. But yet again, the novel is like the perspectives. They survived to the end of Mockingjay. So I don't think Cinna would be a perspective that we'd see simply because he dies early on in the novel series or the original trilogy. Two more prequel perspectives that I could see happening is going all the way back to the Dark Days, or you kind of combine them, I reckon. I could see Suzanne Collins doing this, like the Dark Days and District 13. So seeing how District 13 rebuilt itself from the Dark Days and being bombed and living underground. Or we could have just the Dark Days and completely new character, and completely new cast. We could see maybe the Dark Days from the Covies' perspective, and then we'd have familiar characters, but we would like see names that are familiar, and it'd be better world building, and maybe would find out what other countries as well were outside of Panem. Is Panem the only surviving country? I highly doubt that. There has to be other countries, because look at the state of the US. There are other countries, they've isolated themselves, and I want to know. That's like the one thing I absolutely need to know is what happened to the rest of the world, because the Dark Days, like a prequel of the Dark Days, would absolutely give away all that information, assuming Susan Collins wants to tell us that. She might not. So either District 13, maybe from like Coin's perspective, but yet again, do we want to see like Coin's perspective on that? I don't think that would be very entertaining. I don't think a lot of people want to hear Coin's story. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments. I just don't want to see a Coin story. I would want to see literally anything else but Coin. One last novel that I would like to be written is a sequel. I think not just like rebuilding the like Panem into a democracy. I think a sequel would be good with Suzanne Collins' themes, simply based on the fact that it would be, Plutarch says at the end, like, humans have, he says, I don't remember the exact quote, but humans have this like nature of repeating history, and they're at the end of Mockingjay, they're at that period of time between like everyone agrees to not repeat what had just happened. A sequel where we have a look at what actually happens post-war and that trauma, and rebuilding an entire country back into a democracy rather than an authoritarian state. That would be really interesting to see. We don't necessarily need to see Katniss and Peeta, maybe just a cameo here and there, but it could be from like someone else's perspective. But I also don't see that necessarily happening because Susan Collins wants to keep that, like, that's why we have the epilogues. She kind of wants to keep that vague because we no longer get to see the victors as entertainment. We don't get to see these people as entertainment anymore. So she stops there. So I would like to see that, but I don't think it would realistically happen. But the reason I bring it up is because Susan Collins likes telling the story from a District 12 perspective, and I think she's told all the District 12 victors' perspectives, and I think that's probably why we're not going to see another novel. Once again, I've been seeing a lot of people talking about Susan Collins possibly wanting to complete the trilogy, that we know that Susan Collins loves a trilogy, and I looked it up, and I believe her other series is actually a quartet, not a trilogy. It's just the one trilogy that she's written, so she doesn't actually have a pattern with how she writes books or how many she writes. It's just however many stories she has. So will Susan Collins feel the need to complete a trilogy? I highly doubt it, just because like Lucy Gray, like, she only sings when she has something to say. You know, she's like a Mockingjay, she's like Lucy Gray, she's like the Mockingjay. She has all these stories she wants to tell, and she tells them, and they get worse and more graphic as they go. Do you guys really want her to write another novel? After Haymitch's novel, I don't think so. Like I said, I don't think that she's gonna write a novel outside of District 12. If she's gonna write another story, it'll be like from a District 12 perspective. It'll be like from the Covey outside of District 12 when they get captured during the Dark Days, you know, like rounded up and pushed into District 12. We would get more world building from the Dark Days from a District 12 perspective. Maybe we'll hear about another victor that was like drowned out the same way Lucy Gray was, but I doubt that. I highly doubt that. We'd know about it so far, and I just don't see how she'd want to create another novel unless it's from Peeta's perspective. But once again, she's already told that story. But then, as I'm thinking about it, Haymitch's story was also told in the original trilogy, so maybe we would hear a Peeta story. Maybe it would be from a different, like, Malark perspective. It won't. It won't be. I don't think that another novel is going to be told. We're not going to get another novel. I think she's done with her prequels unless it's, like, really different from the other stories, but it'll have the same themes. Another reason I just don't think there's going to be a novel is that there was so many cameos in Haymitch's novel and Sunrise on the Reaping. She put it in there because, you know, she wants to tell everyone's story. She wants to make sure that the world building is complete, that we know about where the rebellion came from, what was happening with all the other characters, like how we ended up seeing Katniss and Peeta's story. And she's just making sure we know at this point, making sure she has all her story told as well. I don't think, just purely based off of the cameos, I don't think she's going to end up writing another novel. And that's the reason for it. Like, we can see it very clearly about Haymitch's story, is that we see everyone. And everything's basically explained, at least from my point of view. Everyone's role in the rebellion, except for maybe District 13, so maybe that'll be a novel. But everyone's role in the rebellion is explained. So I don't see where she could go from Sunrise on the Reaping. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong and there's going to be another novel. But, you know, let me know, guys, what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you think there will be another novel? Do you not think there will be one? Do you agree with me? There just won't be. What perspective would you like to see from another novel? Would it be a prequel novel, a sequel novel? Is it a, like, way back when prequel novel of the Dark Days? Let me know in the comments section down below. But that is it for today's video, guys. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. I greatly appreciate it, and obviously comment down below. Once again, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, but I've been CJ, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!